The Battle of Yorktown by Sawyer Mercier and Dylan Sawyer.
The Battle of Yorktown started on September 28, 1781, and ended on October 19, 1781.
In 1781, Washington arrived at Yorktown to meet Cornwallis's army. Cornwallis's army had built 10 small forts. Cornwallis asked for aid from British General Clinton. General Clinton said he would send 5,000 British soldiers to set sail from New York to Yorktown. This would set the Continental Army at a disadvantage with only 6,500 soldiers against 8,000 British soldiers. If the reinforcements arrived, the tides of the battle would turn, and the Continental Army would lose the lead they had on the British Army. Washington had a plan. However, he told the Continental Army to dig trenches about 850 yards from the small British forts. Washington made sure pamphlets about false attack plans and made sure they fell into British hands. This trench battle resulted in about a week of artillery fire. The artillery from the trenches broke most of the British artillery. General Clinton told Cornwallis that the 5,000 men from New York were being delayed. This meant that Cornwallis was stuck where he was until the reinforcements arrived.
As you can see in this photo, they would have artillery or cannons in the trenches to fire at the forts. Cornwallis's forts were lined with spikes to prevent them from being run up upon by Continental troops. This was an effective defense method, and the point of the trenches was to eliminate this defense method so that the Continental Army and the French army could penetrate the fortresses.
Washington wanted to build a trench closer to the British, around 400 yards away. This would mean that the Continental Army would have to take out the 9th and 10th British forts. French troops would attack the 9th fort while the Continental Army would take out the 10th fort. Alexander Hamilton led the Continental Army, and the French army was led by Marquis de Lafayette. Hamilton's army sat in their trenches until they were ready. Then all at once Hamilton's men sprinted the quarter-mile from the trenches to the fort. Hamilton's army took the fort in under 10 minutes. The taking of these two forts made Cornwallis trapped and losing ground. This led to Cornwallis's surrender on October 19, 1781. This was the last battle of the Revolutionary War.
The British were down one-third of their men now because of the surrender from Cornwallis. Furthermore, on September 3, 1783, Parliament passed a resolution asking for the war to be over. The war then came to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris and a colonial victory.
Washington's plan. Washington and Rochambeau arrived 13 miles outside the tobacco port of Yorktown, where Cornwallis's men had built a defense of 10 redoubts with artillery batteries and connection trenches. Because of the arrival of General Washington, Cornwallis asked Clinton for help, and the general promised him a fleet of 5,000 British soldiers would set sail from New York to Yorktown. With some troops left behind, General Washington's 2,500 American and 4,000 French soldiers faced 8,000 British troops. They began digging trenches 800 yards away from the British and started a nearly week-long artillery assault on the British on October 9, 1781.
Washington ordered the construction of large bread ovens. This was done so that the British saw the bread ovens and would assume that Washington's army was going to stay for a while. The Americans and French had knocked out most of the British guns with their cannons. However, for Cornwallis and the British, the promised soldiers were delayed to departure from New York. With Alexander's 400 infantrymen, he only lost 9 in the attack, while the 400 French lost 27 men. Nevertheless, with all his troops, he surrendered Cornwallis at Fort No. 10 and forced to surrender. On the morning of October 19, 1781, the British surrendered.
General Cornwallis. Though he probably is known best as the British general who lost the American colonies, Lord Charles Cornwallis was still remarkable. Cornwallis was an educated aristocrat with military and political experience. He served King George III and Britain as one of the leading generals of the Revolutionary War, where he showed to be a great strategist.
In 1781, he was forced to surrender his army of about 8,000 men to George Washington at the Siege of Yorktown. This battle was one of the reasons for the ending of the Revolutionary War, and a win for the colonists after the war. General Cornwallis went on to still be very successful as he was the governor of Ireland and India. He later died on October 5th, 1805.
Alexander Hamilton served as an important part of the Siege of Yorktown. He was in charge of the Continental Army alongside Marquis de Lafayette. Together, they were able to penetrate Fort 10 and 9. Hamilton took on Fort 9 with 400 men, and Marquis de Lafayette took on Fort 10 with French troops. Despite not being one of the four founding fathers, he still helped draft the Constitution and made the America's financial system.
This battle was aided by the French. The French army was commanded by Marquis de Lafayette. Marquis de Lafayette was a hero. He dedicated his time and money to the revolutionary cause. Despite being from France, he still brought men and money to the Revolutionary War.
The reason why the battle was fought over Yorktown is because there was a trade port. This means that the battle had land and sea front. Cornwallis tried to escape by boat when the British were losing the battle. He was unsuccessful because of the weather. Reinforcements for the British were supposed to arrive by boat from New York. The goal of the British was just to keep the port they had taken. The British were defending and the Continental Army was attacking.
This battle is very significant in the American Revolution. From the Siege of Yorktown, the Americas gained over 8,000 troops to their army from the British. Without this win for the colonists, the revolution would have continued because the British still would have all their troops. If the British won this battle, this could have resulted in the Continental Congress losing the war and not gaining freedom from Great Britain.
After the war, the British were down 1/3 of their men now because of the surrender from Cornwallis. Finally, on September 3rd, 1783, Parliament passed a resolution asking for the war to be over. The war then came to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris and a colonial victory and the gaining of independence.